Welcome to the SATLUJ News Hour. This is Gina Vigil coming to you from the Phoenix desk, bringing you the top stories from across the globe. Here are today's headlines. United States President Joe Biden arrives in Kyiv in surprise visit. China slams Blinken's comments on Russia-Ukraine war. The African Union vows zero tolerance to undemocratic change. For our top news today, United States President Joe Biden has arrived in Kyiv to meet Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. The unannounced wartime visit to Ukraine shows support ahead of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion. The U.S. president promised $500 million of additional military aid to Kyiv and further sanctions against Russia, saying President Vladimir Putin's war plans are plainly wrong.
We've committed nearly 700 tanks and thousands of armored vehicles, 1,000 artillery systems, more than 2 million rounds of artillery ammunition, more than 50 advanced launch rocket systems, anti-ship and air defense systems, all defend Ukraine, and that doesn't count the other $500 million we're announcing with you today.
Since Russia's invasion of the Ukraine began nearly a year ago, the world has been broadly categorized into three camps: countries allied with Ukraine, those impartial to the conflict, and the nations that have defended Russia. While the United States and European Union states have provided military assistance to Ukraine, totaling more than $100 billion, other countries have chosen to make their positions known by imposing sanctions on Russia or with their votes at the United In the latest tit-for-tat, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said the United States is in no position to make demands after U.S. top diplomat Antony Blinken warned Beijing against providing weapons to Russia in the war against Ukraine. Wenbin said China will never accept the U.S. pointing fingers at Sino-Russian relations or even coercing us.
向战场源源不断提供武器的是美方，而不是中方。美方没有资格对中方发号施令，我们也从不接受美国对中俄关系指手画脚，甚至胁迫施压。中方在乌克兰问题上的方针归结为一句话，就是劝和促谈。
His comment comes after Blinken expressed deep concerns about the possibility that China will provide lethal material support to Russia. He also pointed to Beijing's collaborative partnership with Moscow, which he said was built based on non-alignment and non-confrontation.
We have seen Chinese companies, and of course in China there's really no distinction between private companies and the state. We have seen them provide non-lethal support to Russia for use in Ukraine. The concern that we have now is based on information we have that they're considering providing lethal support.
Since Blinken's remarks, the European Union's Foreign Affairs Chief, Joseph Borrell, said that China potentially providing arms to Moscow would be a red line in the bloc's relationship with China. Political tensions rise as a Chinese government delegation visited Taiwan for the first time since the start of the pandemic. The visit is sparking some partisan pressure on the island as Beijing reiterated its intentions to annex it. The delegation of 6 officials were invited by the city government, led by Mayor Chang Wan-un of the opposition Kuomintang Party. Upon their arrival, they were not well greeted, as pro-Taiwan independent supporters protested outside the airport, shouting, "Taiwan and China, separate countries," and "Chinese people, get out." Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council said it had approved the application for a 3-day visit on the condition that it would be low-key and without public political statements. But members of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party accused Chang of being secretive about the visit, keeping information away from the party and the public, out of fear it would attract protest or controversy. North Korea is back at it again as the country has fired a pair of short-range ballistic missiles off its east coast, according to South Korea's military. This comes 2 days after Pyongyang resumed banned testing activities with an intercontinental ballistic missile launch. South Korea's military said it strongly condemned the 2 launches as an act of significant provocation. North Korea's state media said 2 projectiles were fired from a multiple rocket launcher, aiming at targets over 200 miles away. Not to mention, Japan also detected the launches, saying 2 ballistic missiles were fired. The missiles reached an altitude of approximately 60 miles and 30 miles and traveled between 200 miles and 250 miles before falling outside Japan's exclusive economic zone. There were no reports of damage to the aircraft or vessels. Coming up next, Tunisia's Ennahdha party leader summoned for questioning. Stay with us. We will be right back after the break. Hello, my name is Gina.
Do you ever wonder what's behind the news? What is it that you are not being told? Going behind the news and finding the truth. Let the truth flow. SATLUJ Network. Let the truth flow.
Welcome back. This is the SATLUJ Network from the Phoenix desk. Tunisia is making big changes as Tunisian police have summoned the head of the biggest opposition party for questioning after a string of arrests targeting critics of President Kais Saied has raised concerns over free speech and political rights. Rashid Ganachi, head of the Ennahdha party and speaker of the elected parliament that Saied formally dissolved last year, has been asked to present himself at Tunis police station. Police have not revealed the purpose of the investigation, but Ganachi has been questioned several times last year on the suspicion of illicit funding for Ennahdha and helping send Tunisian fighters to Syria to support ISIS fighters. The party has denied the accusations against Ganachi, and judges decided not to hold him in detention pending investigation. The latest news coming from Africa as the African Union insisted it had zero tolerance for undemocratic changes of power and vowed to push through a continent-wide free trade deal as it wrapped up a 2-day summit. Leaders of the 55-nation bloc met in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, to discuss a slew of changes facing the continent, including coups, conflict, and climate change. On the final day of the summit, the AU said it was maintaining its suspension of 4 countries, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, and Sudan, which have been ruled by military leaders following coups. At the end of the summit, the bloc's new chairman, Comoros President Azali Assoumani, said the leaders had agreed to accelerate the implementation of a faltering trade deal launched in 2020. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement is billed as the biggest in the world in terms of population, gathering 54 out of 55 countries on a continent with 1.4 billion people. African nations currently trade only about 15% of their goods and services with each other. The agreement aims to boost that by 60% by 2034 by eliminating almost all tariffs. It's been almost 2 weeks since the Turkish-Syrian earthquake and rescue efforts ended in all but 2 provinces as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced $100 million in fresh humanitarian aid to show solidarity with a NATO ally. The 7.8 magnitude tremor that struck southeastern Turkey and northern Syria has killed more than 44,000 people. No survivors have been found in the last 24 hours. The United Nations is appealing for $1 billion in aid for Turkey and nearly $400 million for Syria. And grassroots efforts have also sprung up across the world to fill the gap. Hans Kluge, the World Health Organization's Europe director, said relief workers were facing the worst natural disaster in the region for a century, adding that 26 million people need assistance across both countries. In Turkey alone, an estimated 1 million people are living in tents and temporary shelters, while at least 80,000 injured people are in hospitals. In Syria, up to 5 million people may be homeless, many already internally displaced after fleeing civil war. In the Middle East, the Palestinian Authority has backtracked on pushing for a United Nations Security Council draft resolution condemning illegal Israeli settlement activity after pressure from Washington. The Council session will focus on the situation in the Middle East and the question of Palestine. The United Arab Emirates, which had drafted the resolution along with Palestinian Authority officials, informed the Council that the resolution and the vote would be dropped. Reports by several other U.S. and Israeli news outlets, citing diplomatic sources, said the Palestinian Authority agreed to drop pursuit of the vote amid pressure from the U.S. government, including promises of a financial aid package, as well as a temporary suspension of announcements on new Israeli settlement units and Palestinian home demolitions. Coming up next, floods and landslides killed dozens in Brazil. Stay with us. We will be right back after the break.
Life is not scripted, never foretold. No matter what happens and where it happens, open your eyes and read between the lines. And never stop asking questions or wanting to know more. Discover the unknown. Hear the human story. Be impartial. Be courageous. Find the untold story. And keep the pioneering spirit alive. Committed to truth. SATLUJ Network. Let the truth flow.
Welcome back. This is the SATLUJ Network from the Phoenix desk. Devastating news coming in from Brazil as torrential rain has triggered flooding and landslides in coastal areas of Brazil's southeast, killing at least 36 people and displacing hundreds of others. In Sao Paulo state, television and social media footage from the town of São Sebastião showed entire neighborhoods underwater. Debris from hillside houses swept away by mud, as well as flooded highways, and cars destroyed by fallen trees. The town, 124 miles north of the city of Sao Paulo, was one of the hardest hit, as a record 24 inches of rain fell in 24 hours. Sao Paulo State Governor Tarcísio de Freitas declared a state of emergency in 5 towns along the coast.
A gente está também mobilizando vários caminhões de São Paulo para cá, com mantimentos, com cesta básica, com cobertor, com colchão, com água mineral, com material de limpeza, para a gente também poder prestar essa assistência humanitária, né, esse primeiro suporte às pessoas que estão sendo aí desalojadas e que estão desabrigadas.
Weather forecasts show heavy rains are set to continue in Sao Paulo's coastal area, challenging rescue workers and raising the prospect of a higher death toll. First it was tech companies, then car companies, and now airline companies. The Australian airline Qantas is deciding to let go of staff ahead of industrial action. This would create uncertainty about accessing workplace rights and water down protections against other forms of discrimination, such as dismissing workers before they accrue parental leave. Qantas is fighting on two fronts: against the union, which argues the protection against adverse action is not limited to presently existing rights, and against the Workplace Relations Minister, Tony Burke, who has sought to intervene in the case.
While I can't deliver anything nearly as spectacular as some of the silliness of some of the fear campaigns, what I can do is pretty straightforward. I can explain what the problem is that the government wants to fix and why this bill fixes those problems and addresses those problems.
Qantas hopes to overturn a full federal court decision, exposing it to a compensation bill for laying off staff at 10 airports in November 2020. In July 2021, the federal court ruled Qantas's outsourcing of the workers was in part driven by a desire to avoid industrial action, which is a breach of the Fair Work Act. Qantas reply submissions are due in March. The latest in tech news, as Meta is testing a new subscription service, Meta Verified, that would let Facebook and Instagram users pay to have a verified account. Meta Verified, which will roll out first in Australia and New Zealand this week, will let users verify an account with a government ID, get a blue badge, get extra impersonation protection against accounts claiming to be you, and get direct access to customer support. The paid subscription service starts at $11.99 a month. There would be no changes to accounts on Facebook and Instagram that are already verified, the company said, adding that only users who are over the age of 18 will be allowed to subscribe. Mark Zuckerberg's plan comes after a similar service at a rival social media network, Twitter, last year backfired wildly with an embarrassing spate of fake accounts that scared advertisers. Marvel fans, this one is for you, as Disney's Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania has created an unexpected buzz, taken in an estimated $118 million over a long holiday weekend to dominate the North American box office. The estimate exceeded predictions and gave the latest Marvel superhero film one of the strongest totals ever for a 4-day U.S. President's Day weekend. With Paul Rudd again playing the microscopic Ant-Man and Evangeline Lilly as the Wasp, the film blew the weekend competition aside. Analyst David A. Gross of Franchise Entertainment Research said despite uncharacteristically soft reviews and audience scores, he said this is an excellent opening by Marvel's own sensational standards. And those were our top stories for today. Thank you for joining us. This is the SATLUJ Network, the news network that lets truth flow. For more information and the full story coverage, go to satlujnetwork.com. And we'd love to hear your feedback at info@satlujtv.com. We will see you next time.